All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to STEALTHYHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.
You're listening to the Northern Hunter Podcast, home of all things hunting, fishing, and outdoors in Alaska.
Welcome back to the Northern Hunter Podcast, everybody. I'm Dalton Gray.
I'm Ryan Humphreys.
And we are once again missing our dear friend James.
Yeah.
He is out for this episode, but hopefully he'll be back with us next week. Well, he'd better be, because I'll be gone. So,
Oh, will you?
Yeah. I'll be gone for the next couple episodes anyway.
That's sad.
But he'll be back, and I'll be out hunting. So out to guide a fall brown bear hunt on the coast, and that's what we're going to talk about today before I get back and do a recap of that hunt. But I wanted to wrap back real fast. On Monday, we spoke about on episode 50 about moose hunting. We kind of recapped that moose hunt that I did here a couple of weeks ago now.
Make sure you go listen to that.
Yeah, go check out that cool story. Talk a lot about moose calling and strategies and tactics in that one. We didn't talk about guns for moose and some of the gear that I used. So I wanted to just quickly mention I used my Yukon River knife on that bull. And I used the small game and the Sendero pack. And you know, I have to be honest with you. I think I almost preferred the small game.
What did you like better about it?
The tip.
Yeah?
Yeah.
A little more pointed?
Yeah, a little more point to it. A little easier to just reach up underneath that big, heavy hide.
I can see that.
And get into some of those hard-to-get places. Yeah, and it skinned really, really well.
Yeah, I can see that.
I was impressed with it. So I'm going to be using that a lot more than I thought I would. So the Sendero pack knife did a great job. It's got a nice long belly. I fleshed that entire black bear with that knife. Did a great job. I love it for a turning knife like that.
Kind of seems like if you had to pick one to do it all, it might be the Sendero.
Yeah, either the Sendero or the Hunter.
Yeah, just because of the bigger blade.
Yeah, a little more blade on the Hunter. But yeah, if I could only use one, it'd probably be the Hunter. But on that moose, I used the small game and the Sendero pack knife. And then I also used those 60-inch club game bags from Troy Sessions.
Those turn out nice.
Very, very good game bags. They're soaking in dish soap at my house in a tub right now after being washed up. But yeah, having the handle on the end, when the pilot and I were loading the plane with meat, he was impressed with having a handle on one end.
Yeah.
He really liked that. So shout out to 60-inch club and Yukon River knives there. And then I already mentioned in that last episode that I shot that moose having to back up the climb.
Right.
If you want to hear about that, go back and listen to the episode. But when I had to back up shoot that bull, I shot him with my Weatherby Mark V Backcountry 2.0 chambered in 338 Weatherby RPM with a 205 grain hand-loaded power hammer from Hammer Bullets. And I recovered one of the bullets. I posted that in a photo on my Instagram.
I saw that.
At The Endless Hunter on Instagram and just at my name, Dalton Gray, on Facebook. If you want to go see the photo of that bullet, I've got it in my hand with one of the Hunter's 180 grain Nosler Accubons out of his 300 Win Mag. We found one of each in that bull moose. So just a little bit of the gear and the stuff that I use there. We didn't talk about what is enough gun to kill a moose. I would probably say anything 270 and up. That was one of our points in here. 270 will work fine. 30-06 will work fine. If you're buying a gun specifically for moose hunting and you can handle the recoil, I'd recommend a 300 Win Mag. it's just really hard to go wrong with a good 300 Win
And there's
Mag.
ammo everywhere for it.
Yeah, there's easy ammunition availability. If you're a hand loader, then maybe something else will fit your fancy. 300 PRC is also a good one if you can get
That's pretty sweet there
one
too.
of those 212 grain ELDXs or a 190 grain Hornady CX is their monometal copper bullet.
Well, you know what I've been talking about is that 33 Sherman.
Yeah, I've been hearing you mention that a lot.
I keep talking about it. I'm going to plan on building myself a rifle, and I'm going to do a Wildcat build.
Yeah.
Now that I started looking at them, I can't get away from them.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how that one turns out. Obviously, we'll have to cover that in good detail when we go through that. But for a gun, a lot of people ask, what's enough gun to kill a moose? If you can handle the recoil and you want to buy a new gun and you don't have one specifically that you want to use for moose, then I'd probably recommend starting at a 300 Win Mag. That's a good place to start. That 180 grain bullet range and up is going to be great. And then pick a tough controlled expansion bullet. Obviously, we're partial to the hammer bullets on this show, but a good bonded bullet with a lead core like a Nosler AccuBond or a Swift A-frame or a Swift Scirocco or a Barnes or a Hornady CX, something in that tough bullet category that won't fragment and come apart. Even the Hornady ELDX does a good job for what it's built for. It holds together plenty well enough to kill a moose.
I cut up a neck for somebody. Somebody gave my sister-in-law some neck meat. She had me cut it up because she had no idea what she was doing.
Okay.
And there was a piece of lead in the neck that made me think it was probably shot with with a cup and core. Yeah. Maybe an ELDX or something. But it definitely came apart. Yeah. And there's a piece of it in the neck.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Anyway, just wanted to kind of quickly touch back on that before we get into this week's episode, which is fall brown bear hunting.
Yeah.
Dun-da-da-da. So we've talked a lot about spring bear hunting on this podcast. We've talked a lot about bear baiting and coastal bear hunting in the spring and the tactics that go into that. And the tactics are similar in that there's a lot of sitting and waiting. There's a lot of glassing time. You're going to spend a lot of hours behind your binoculars or your spotting scope if you choose to bring one as a client. Usually as a client, you just bring binoculars and your guide will have a spotting scope. That's normally the case. You're still going to be doing a lot of sitting and waiting, but you're probably going to be overlooking some different type of terrain.
Yeah.
In the spring, your tactics revolve around rut activity and when the boars are cruising around looking for sows. And that there's no fish in the rivers yet. They're not focused on that food source. Their food source is going to be grass and roots and herbs and things on the hillsides or on the beach grass where they're going to get a lot of fiber in their diet to really get their gut moving again before the fish start running. That's what their diet is going to largely consist of in the springtime is grasses. And so finding a good rutting area that has traditionally been a good spot to find hot sows where the boars will cruise through and try to find one is going to be one of your better bets. In the fall, that's different because you're targeting their food sources. In the fall time, a lot of the brown bear seasons open relatively late. A lot of them open in middle of September and on. For different units, that's going to be different for different parts of the state. But like if you say the peninsula, in Unit 9, that season opens October 7th, I believe it is. October 7th to October 22nd. So it's about a 2-week stretch in the middle of October. And that's after most of the main fish runs occur. A lot of the fish run in that, late July, all of August, a lot of September. And they start to pretty well dry off by about the middle of September. It's starting to wane a little bit. Then you'll get some late runs of a few different kinds of fish that'll come up. And some of the late runs will come up in October even. And if you can target an area to hunt that has a run of fish in October, then you're going to find those bears that are trying to get that late catch. And bears have one thing on their mind in the fall, and that is prepare. They're getting ready for the great apocalypse of snow that's headed their way. And before they head up into their dens, into the high country and disappear into a hole in the ground for the next several months to hibernate, they're going to try to stock up and be as fat as they can possibly be. You can look up all the photos and videos of Katmai National Park up here in Alaska. and they have the fat bear contests. And these bears are the prime example of, well, the name fat bears.
Yeah.
They're obscenely huge. They're just monstrous fat bears.
They're obscenely obese.
Yeah, there you go. Obscenely obese. A good one.
Yeah, you like that?
You like a little jingle after that one.
Your dad might like that,
Obscenely obese. Why would my dad like
alliteration?
That? Oh, alliteration. Yes. Yes, that's true. So anyway, your food source is where you're going to be looking for the brown bears. That's what they're focused on in the fall time. And if you can find a run of fish in a river, like a late run of salmon, that's probably going to be your best bet. Now, sometimes that'll be some beach hunting where there's like a creek mouth, but a lot of times you're going to be looking up into some of those rivers, and you'll want to look for a little knoll or a knob that you can sit up and overlook like a large valley system where you have visibility down to the river up and downstream of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that will always be the same with any brown bear hunt is the scent is the king. If you can position yourself far enough away from where the bears are going to be that your scent is not going to be blowing directly into them and they're not going to blow out of the area.
Right.
You don't want to be walking around down in where you're going to be trying to make a stalk or an approach ahead of that time, because they will smell you. They will smell your footprints 2 days later and they'll leave, and you won't get another chance at them potentially. I've seen brown bears walk by my 3-day-old boot tracks from rubber boots, and they stick their nose in the sand and they smell it and they look up and around like they're nervous and they just walk away. And I've never seen the bear after that. So you need to be very, very careful still with your scent control, but finding a good glassing area to just overlook a good food source like where the salmon are going to be is going to be your primary tactic in the fall. Now, in some areas, you're going to be looking up off of the salmon rivers. You're going to be looking up into the higher country. And this is going to be where they're up and roaming and really potentially scoping out a denning area.
Yeah.
And you're going to find them up on those foothills just kind of moving around. And you'll have to just make a quick move, and you might have to cover a lot of country on a hunt like that. That's more typical for a little bit later season hunt and for the type of area that you're going to be hunting. If you're dropped in near a salmon river that has fish, your best bet is likely going to be to hunt that area if you have some visibility. If you're dropped in a higher area that has more elevated terrain off of the river bottom country and off of the ocean side, then you're going to be finding those bears up more in the hill country, and you'll glass them up in those patches of grass that'll all be brown and dead, but you'll find them in between the alders. As they're traveling through the brush, they'll pop out for 100 yards and walk through a clear spot and then go back into the brush. And then you've got to try to keep tabs on him and figure out where he's going to pop out into visibility, maybe get a shot on him.
Are those brownies looking for berries at all?
They definitely can be in some areas, but a lot of the coastal areas, after it freezes and goes dead like that, there's not a whole lot for berries.
Not like interior.
Not like the interior, no.
Yeah, I was just the other day. I mean, it's been freezing here for a week and a half, and I'm still picking berries off. Blueberries that are good to eat.
Yeah, and the interior bears will be on those until they're covered in snow.
Right.
And even then, some a little bit after that, and then they'll go up to den. But the interior bears are, in my experience, easier to find and predict than the coastal bears are when you're hunting them in the high country. When they're up high, man, it's anybody's guess what those bears are doing in the fall time up in the high country, because they can be just cruising. And we talked in the last episode about bears being able to cover the mountains. It is impressive how much ground these brown bears can cover. Like if they're leaving an area, you'll see them at the mouth of a valley, walking up valley to go up into the hills, and he won't stop till he goes out of view over the saddle 2-3 miles away. Like if they're on a mission to get up to the high country, they're going, and you're not going to stop them, and you're not going to catch them. If you're behind them, man, they can walk through that 12-foot alder brush like you cannot believe. And you're just not going to catch them.
Right.
So you have to be in a position to cut one off if you're going to try to intercept one like that. That's more typical of like a rifle hunt. If you're bow hunting a brown bear in the fall, you're pretty much relegated to beach and river. And the beaches, they'll beachcomb and they'll find some things to forage on the beaches, whether it's a dead whale or something like that, or a seal that washes up if one gets killed by an orca or something like that. I've seen that before. If you can find a whale that has bears on it, man, you are in luck. That's your pot of gold if there's a big bear hitting it. Just treat that like a bear bait and just wait till a big one comes out and then make your stalk.
Yeah.
That can be your golden ticket. The other thing is with bow hunting is just to find a river with fish in it, because that's where you're going to be able to get those close quarter encounters. Right. But it's going to be a lot of patience, because even more so than rifle hunting, when you've got a bow hunter in the fall, you've got to get exponentially closer. That goes without saying, than a rifle hunter. And so you've really got to be inside that bubble. And if you blow him out, then you're going to blow him out bad. You're going to bust him in the wind at 40 yards instead of 150 or 300 yards on a rifle stock. So it's just something to keep in mind. You have to weigh your risks very carefully when you go on a stalk with a bow hunter, because if you blow him out close, man, he's probably never going to be seen again.
Right.
You'll see him going over the next mountain if you even see him again. He might just stay in the brush and disappear. But that's kind of the tactic difference there. The weather is also a huge difference in the fall. You're going to encounter, very likely, much worse weather in the fall than you will in the spring. Sense. The winds are going to be worse. You're probably going to deal with some snow. It's going to be a lot colder, and your gear set needs to be adjusted appropriately. In the spring, on a hunt like that, let's just say a 10 to 14 day hunt, you could probably get away with using down as your insulation, because you're probably going to get a few good days mixed in here and there. At least in my experience of doing it, I've usually gotten a few days here and there where I can dry out a down sleeping bag.
Right.
I used a down bag this spring guiding on the coast for brown bears. And I had enough dry days mixed into my hunts that even if I was damp or the bag was damp after a few days of it raining, I was able to put it outside on a spruce tree or something and dry it out in the sun after several days of it being damp. And so that wasn't a problem. In the fall, you could very easily go the entire length of a hunt and not have any days of sun to dry anything out. The weather tends to be a lot worse in the fall. I'm not saying that it couldn't be good and you might luck out, but I would prepare for the worst and hope for the best in that situation. So with that in mind, I would probably stick with synthetic insulation on your fall hunt.
You can do like me and only own synthetic.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And usually what I use anyway on most of my hunts is synthetics because it performs the same or almost the same when it's wet. You get that performance under compromised conditions. I'm going to give a great example here. My friend Remy, that we've talked about a little bit before on the show. He and I guide together in the spring, and we're good hunting buddies. And he went out moose hunting just prior to when I left for the field. And he was riding a four-wheeler into a quite remote area. Had I not been guiding, I would have been with him. He was with a couple other folks, and anyway, they went way back deep into the back country, and he was crossing a river in his four-wheeler, and through a series of events that I won't explain, his four-wheeler got rolled in the river, and he went under with it.
There's one I haven't done yet.
And he had a meat wagon attached to the wheeler, and all of his gear and stuff was strapped to the four-wheeler racks. His Barney's pack and his rifle was on his back, I believe, or possibly in a gun boot. I don't remember. But he went completely underwater and got pushed down river, didn't get up out of the water until 300 yards downstream. So he got pushed down.
Been a moving river.
Oh yeah. I've been to the river of which he speaks.
Did he get across the river?
He did eventually.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. The other people that were with him ended up being able to get to him at the shallow spot where he got washed into. And then they stood up the four-wheeler, attached the winch cable to another machine, and they were able to pull him across with his machine and meat wagon. Didn't lose any of his gear. Nothing got lost in the river, thankfully.
Oh, good.
He got pinned underneath of it a couple of times, pinned up against a boulder underneath the four-wheeler underwater. So needless to say, soaking wet, drenched.
Yeah.
And he said, I got across the river, jumped off the four-wheeler, ran around and collected firewood, started a fire within a couple of minutes, grabbed out my tarp out of my pack, and I left all of my base layers on, but I stripped off my wet outer layers, and he put on his Barney's Frontier Gear of Alaska Super Cub jacket, which is a 2-layer Pertex waterproof face fabric that is pretty waterproof for what it is, and it's synthetic Primaloft silver, I believe, puffy insulation. So it's synthetic insulation. And he wrapped up in his tarp and that jacket and whatever dry clothes he had in his pack that were in dry bags. Another good reason to keep all of your gear that you're not wearing in dry stuff sacks in your pack. Little event sacks or something like that, just like a little Sea to Summit Sil nylon roll top bag. You can get them anywhere from a 1 liter sack for all of your electronics and cords and things, all the way up to probably a 20 liter or something.
Leupold has like some zippered stuff like that now too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I like the looks of those ones from Leupold. But so he had all of his extra clothing in dry sacks, and that Frontier Gear of Alaska Super Cub puffy coat was in the dry sack. And so he put that on and then was able to warm himself back up next to the fire, wrapped up in his tarp and his puffy coat. That would not have worked in a down jacket because all that water would have saturated the down and would not have allowed the synthetic insulation. It would not have wicked the moisture through the puffy like the synthetic did. The down, when that vapor goes through that down, it just saturates the down fill. And then it loses loft, which then loses the insulation value. So having a synthetic insulation layer like that is, in my opinion, absolutely irreplaceable on hunts in Alaska. Some hunts, I will bring down insulation, like on a sheep hunt where I'm not going to be doing a lot of wet weather camping. I don't think. If I expect relatively decent weather, then I'll risk it and I'll bring down just because it's so much lighter and more packable.
It's light and packable.
It's probably a third lighter than synthetic, and it's a lot more packable. So much more packable.
I got this new jacket in here that's synthetic. That's surprisingly packable.
I was going to get to that here in a second. But having synthetic insulation could end up being a lifesaver, quite literally. And in that sense for him, I'm sure it played a huge part in his ability to warm back up. Now, being able to start a fire is a huge deal. That's great. But had it been pouring rain, he might not have been able to get a fire going, and you might have had to rely solely on your insulation to dry yourself back out, which I've done before, just testing it. And it doesn't do nearly as well with down. It almost is useless when you climb into down gear like that when you're soaking wet. Synthetic, it will wick the moisture through the garment and dry you out and retain its insulation value, so you're not going to freeze in the process.
Well, I think an important note is just the fact that he kept his base layers on because he knew with his body heat, they would dry right out.
Yeah,
and putting on something like a synthetic jacket, it's going to actually start to wick it out of you.
Right.
And it's amazing how fast that happens.
Yeah.
Going from sweating
to,
to not sweating, and then boom, you're dry.
Yeah, exactly.
It's sweet having that kind of gear.
So on this last moose hunt that I just got back from guiding, I decided to bring a synthetic bag. Like I mentioned before, I brought my 15-degree mountain, Western mountaineering sleeping bag in the springtime to guide spring bear hunts because I was fairly confident that I would have enough dry weather to get away with that to dry it out if I needed to. And all of my other insulation layers were synthetic.
Right.
So push comes to shove, I could always sleep in those if I had to inside of my down bag, if my down bag was soaked, right? So I have that redundancy there. One was down, one was synthetic. If I were to bring down insulation on a hunt, I would probably opt to bring a synthetic sleeping bag so that if that down got wet, I could still dry it out in the synthetic bag at some point. This fall, though, on that moose hunt, I brought a synthetic bag and synthetic puffy gear because I expected it to be wet a lot of the time. And with the snow and things like that, I was able to sleep in my wet layers sometimes and be able to dry that out, no problem. On this bear hunt that I'm going out to guide, I'm bringing my 0-degree synthetic marmot bag. It's a Trestles Elite Zero, and it's not an expensive bag. I think it was like $250. Nice. They're not that expensive. They are bulky and heavy, but they're not any bulkier or more heavy than anything else on the market that you'll find in the hunting industry lineup. And to my knowledge, KUIU only makes down bags. Stone Glacier only makes down bags. First Light has their bags from Nemo. They
don't make bags. They sell.
Right. They sell Nemo products such as tents and sleeping bags. Those are down bags. So to my knowledge right now, and somebody out there, if you know of a company in the hunting industry specifically that makes a synthetic bag, let me know. But the only one that I know of is Kifaru.
Okay.
And they make their slick bag, which is synthetic insulation. And from my understanding, they are very good, high quality synthetic bags, but they're not any lighter or any more packable than these marmots are. And the marmots are half the price of the Kifaru bags. And I've had the Zero now for a couple of years and it's still going strong. So I'm going to bring that again with the same layering system almost that I brought during moose season on this bear hunt. All synthetic puffy gear and a synthetic bag, because I can't rely on there being a nice dry day.
Right.
A lot of times in the fall, you're going to get a lot more wet weather than you might in the spring and early summer hunts up here. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you have layers that will work for you and dry you out should you get wet, because you probably won't have a fire, especially in a bear camp. I'm not bringing my Peaks tent and a titanium wood stove on this bear hunt because I'm trying to keep my scent as low as possible. With brown bears, I don't ever have campfires. With moose, I don't care. It's never seemed to make a difference. But with bears, their nose is their primary defense. And if they smell something off, even a natural wood smoke smell, I just want to eliminate that variable. That's just my preference. Right. Other guys, I'm sure, don't care. In my opinion, you can have a fire after you kill a bear. That's just how I run my bear camps when I hunt. So
good place to cook some of that bear.
Yeah, well, not coastal brown bear.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Yeah, black bear maybe, but not coastal brown bear. But anyway, so with insulation in mind, we'll jump to the next thing right after this break.
Hammer Bullets produces what we at the Northern Hunter consider to be the most premium and best working monolithic bullets on the market today. These bullets are easy to load, extremely accurate, and best of all, they're always in stock and ready to ship. The guys at Hammer designed them so that after penetrating the hide of an animal, it sheds its petals, initiating a massive energy dump while retaining the rear shank for maximum penetration. These bullets are built with 100% focus on how they perform on game, and their proprietary designs produce great BCs with specialized pressure grooves for amazing inherent accuracy and speed. They have a minimum expansion velocity of 1,800 feet per second, which allows for long-range shots, but with no maximum velocity, making them perfect for every cartridge from your granddaddy's old 30-30 to the high-velocity round like the Weatherby 3378 without having to worry about your bullet failing. To view their expansive selection and find the perfect match for your hunting needs, go to hammerbullets.com and use discount code TheNorthernHunter to drop the hammer on your next adventure.
So one thing that we haven't done on this show in a little while is gone into a deep dive about guns and ballistics and bows and arrows and kinetic properties of arrows.
And bullets.
And bullets.
Right.
So are you ready to dive into this?
Let's dive in.
Yeah. All right. So the question is often asked, and we've talked about it on the show before from a listener that won a brown bear hunt.
Right.
And he was asking if his 338, 378 Weatherby was going to be enough gun for a brown bear. And we said, I believe so.
Yeah.
But what in our mind here at the show, and I know James is going to absolutely hate not being here and missing this discussion, but hey, that's just how she goes.
I'll have the same discussion with him.
Yeah,
right?
He can weigh in on this when I'm gone and say what he thinks. But I think we're pretty much all of the same mindset when it comes to bigger is better. Now let's talk about bows and arrows first, and we'll get that done and out of the way because this is a pretty easy discussion. Now, Mo, you and I have both bow hunted quite a bit. We've both killed several bears with our bows over the years.
We killed
black bears over a bait.
Yeah.
And your dad was the guy that kind of taught both of us and trained us up in bear baiting. Yeah. And so he has also killed 98% of his bears with a bow He's only killed a couple with a gun at this point.
Yeah.
And upwards of 30 or more black bears with a bow over a bait. And so that there's a lot of collective bow hunting experience in our little circle here is my point.
Right.
So everybody's going to have a different opinion about whether you need more arrow weight or less arrow weight and more speed, or fixed blade broadhead versus expandable blade broadhead, cut on contact versus non-cut on contact broadhead. We got into this a little bit with our good friend Brad Ivy on the show a number of episodes ago, talking about bow hunting and archery equipment. But there is one common thing that you will see in the hunting industry when it comes to dangerous game with archery equipment, and that is heavy arrows. I've seen guys that have pulled it off with varying styles of broadheads. And you can certainly pull it off and kill a brown bear or a grizzly bear with different styles of broadheads and with even possibly a lighter arrow on a grizzly bear. But when it comes to brown bears on the coast, you're talking about potentially 1,000-pound plus animal. In the fall when they're all fatted up on fish. They've put on hundreds of pounds since the spring. Brown bears can go from 700 pounds in the spring to 1,100 pounds in the fall.
That's a lot.
They can put on hundreds of pounds of weight, of fat storage to survive the winter in hibernation. And so that's a lot more resistance on your arrow going through a 1,000-pound animal versus a 700-pound animal. Even a 700-pound brown bear is still an immense animal. It's still a huge animal to kill with a bow. And the hide is tough. Penetrating through a hide that is caked up with sand and dirt and debris dulls broadheads quickly. And a lot of guys will get half shaft penetration. We'll just call it that. Okay, so on a 30-inch arrow, you might get 15 inches. That might seem like a lot of penetration, and that would be practically through and through on a whitetail deer.
Yeah.
That'd be both lungs. But on a brown bear, you're talking about a one lung shot. Because the chest is as wide as this podcast table on some of these big brown bears. They're monstrous animals.
Since we're not on film here, this podcast table is like 3 feet wide.
Yeah. They're huge animals.
Yeah.
And so 15 inches is going to get you a third of the way through that bear's chest cavity. It's not going to be enough. And so you have to look at your arrow setup first. It all starts with the arrow. Bow setup, yes, you need to be able to shoot, I would probably say 60 pounds is probably as light as I would say for a brown bear, for a coastal brown bear. We're not talking about interior grizzlies that will max out at 500 pounds. We're talking about coastal brown bears and trophy class brown bears. So a 9-footer or bigger is what most guys are looking for. Some guys are going to be less picky. They'll shoot an 8 or 8.5 foot, and that's totally fine, but that's a different animal. For the hopes and dreams bear, we'll call it, we're looking at 9 foot or better for a real trophy class animal for most people.
Yeah.
And so your arrow weight, provided that your draw weight is 60 pounds or so, some guys can shoot 70, 75, 80 pound bows and be totally fine. If you can do that, that's great. You know,
if you can do that after you wake up in a cold morning after being stiff in a sleeping bag and not sleeping well all night.
Yes.
That's what really makes a difference.
Or sitting shivering on a glassing knob for 11 hours
just
that day.
Just because you can walk out your backyard and do that in 60, 70, 80 degrees does not mean you can do it in 30 degrees.
Right, exactly. And that's a great point. I didn't even think about mentioning that. So, you know, say you're glassing all day and you're just overlooking an area and then boom, you got to go on a stalk. You make your move, you're into, 25 yards on a trophy brown bear. And you've been freezing cold all day long. You're wet, you're tired, you're shivering. You can't get that 80-pound draw weight back. You can't get past that wall. And there are stories of guys that have encountered exactly that situation.
Right. So
manageable draw weight, right? You can gauge that as like manageable recoil for a rifle system. If you can't accurately shoot a 338, 378 Weatherby because the recoil is too punishing, then you shouldn't shoot that. You're better off shooting that brown bear with a 30-06 than you are with that gun that you can't handle the recoil on and that you flinch every single time you pull a shot off. So back to the bows. Provided that you have 60 pounds minimum draw weight is what I would probably say for a brown bear hunt. You need to look at your arrow weight. your forward of center weight. Now, we're not going to get into too much detail about arrow build because I'll be saying more than I know, realistically.
You're right.
But if you look up Ed Ashby and the Ashby Foundation, they go over the edge as far as forward of center weight. So basically, you're looking at the momentum of the arrow and the kinetic energy that that arrow carries, and that gets more with weight and speed combined, right? Well, the forward of center weight, picture like you're throwing a lawn dart. You want the front end of that dart to be heavy so that when you throw it, the front stays going forward, right?
It pulls the rear forward.
Exactly.
Here's a great example.
Okay.
There's this preacher that tells a story about being in a tow truck, pulling a truck and camper, very, very heavy camper up a hill.
Yes.
Straps broke on the tow truck. And the truck and trailer went back. He said it went right back down that hill and it went straight. They don't go straight when you're trying to back them straight, but it went straight. And I've always thought when I've heard him tell that story is it went straight because the trailer was pulling the truck, just like it'll go straight when the truck's pulling the trailer.
Exactly.
When the higher weight is in front, it allows it to pull and keep it straight, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. So you want that weight in the front. You don't want to have, let's just say, a 600 grain arrow and have the weight evenly distribute all the way across the shaft of the arrow, right? That wouldn't work. No arrow is designed with an even percentage of weight front to back. They're all nose heavy. But the heavier you go at the front end of the arrow, so like a brass insert and then a sleeve, a collar on the outside of the shaft, and then a heavier than average broadhead. Now you have to up your arrow spine, which ups your overall arrow weight to support that front weight. That front weight. Otherwise, your spine is too weak. If you add a heavier than normal broadhead and you add a brass insert, and now all that weight is up front, you can't shoot the same spine arrow as if you'd be shooting a 150 grain point, and now you're shooting a 300 grain total combined weight point.
Right.
Now the shaft is too weak because when that string applies pressure to the nock and forces it forward, that shaft is going to bend. You have that archer's paradox where the shaft bends in flight. That'll bend too much. It'll compromise your flight and it might break your arrow shaft entirely if you have too much point weight and not enough spine. So you up your spine and then you up your point weight. And most guys that I've seen, and there are a lot of guys out there that have killed great archery brown bears here in the last number of years. Cole Kramer on Kodiak Island. Kramer's Guide Service. He is pretty well known for taking a lot of archery brown bear hunters. Whether or not he enjoys it or dislikes bow hunters as a guide, I don't know. Another popular one that guys will probably know of is Lance Kronberger. And he's the one that's guided the guy from Kuyu. I think it's Brendan Burns. He's killed a couple of Boone and Crockett brown bears with his compound bow now. But those guys, the common thing that you'll see with all of their bow hunting kills on these big brown bears is they shoot heavy arrows. And another common theme that you'll see is single bevel broadheads. Now, the guy from Kuyu, Brendan, he's shot his last couple, I believe, with, oh boy, I'm spacing out now. I believe the last one he shot was with a 3-blade broadhead. It wasn't a G5 Montec style. It was a real long, sweeping curve, very, very gradually curved 3-blade.
Okay.
I think VAP archery.
I don't know. I haven't heard of that before.
I'm going to have to look this up while we're going here and try to maintain my focus. But he was shooting a 3-blade broadhead. We're going to look this up here real fast and verify this. We'll put
Vantage Point Archery?
I believe so.
VPA?
VPA, maybe. That might be right.
Or there's a VAP Hunting Arrow by Victory Archery. All kinds of information for those of you listening.
Yeah, VPA Archery. I'm looking on their website here. I don't see it right now.
They do have a single bevel on there.
Yeah, his was a 3-blade, and it was a real long, sweeping curve broadhead.
I'm real interested in looking at some of these, actually. I like the way some of these look. But.
Yeah. 3-blade, they've got 21 different 3-blades. Wow.
Well, they got options.
Yeah, so at any rate, I don't see it on here. It might not be the right brand. Anyway, so Brendan shot his with a non-single bevel, right? It was a double bevel,
Okay.
3-bladed broadhead. But most of the guys that you'll see are shooting these Ashby broadheads. They've got several different models. They've got the Masai. They've got the Ashby Original. They've got several different kinds of 2-blade single bevel broadheads. And so the idea is if you have a double bevel blade, picture on like a regular old pocket, and you were to cut down in a soft medium, like in a bowl of Jell-O, and you just let the weight of that blade cut, it's going to go straight down, right? So with even pressure, it just goes straight down in the cut. With a single bevel, only one side of the blade surface is sharpened. So when you cut straight down with the natural weight of that object, it's going to follow whatever angle that bevel is at. So it'll cut down at a curve naturally. You can, in theory, the theory is that you can get a single bevel blade sharper than a double bevel blade. And the Ashby Foundation has done years and years of research and shooting into animals and testing this theory. Dangerous game in Africa, Cape buffalo, brown bears, you name it, they've shot it with a single bevel head. And the effect is when you have 2 blades with corresponding single bevel sharpening, when it pierces into a medium, it has a rotating effect. And so you match that up with the helical twist of your fletchings because your arrow naturally spins one way or the other in flight. Just because you're right-handed does not mean that your arrow spins right in flight. Some arrows spin left, some arrows spin right. It can depend on the bow and on the fletching setup. It just depends. Talk to your local archery shop guru about that. But that's something that I learned here just recently, is that not every arrow spins the same way. So you need to match up the helical fletch of your arrow to the direction that the broadhead will then spin and cut and rotate once it makes contact with the flesh of the animal. The idea there is that when you hit bone, it doesn't kill all of your kinetic energy. That's what causes further penetration in an animal. You have momentum of the arrow. When it makes contact with the animal and you hit bone, all that energy is just applied into the point of that arrow. And it's not really spinning anymore. It's not twisting. It's just trying to push it through.
It's just cutting.
Just trying to jam that broadhead through that bone and then keep going, which usually results in, if you hit a rib square on, it'll dramatically decrease penetration. And if you hit a shoulder bone, it will entirely stop penetration. With a single bevel broadhead design, Ed Ashby has proven in his ways, and you can look up all kinds of videos about this, that when a single bevel head that is rotating makes contact with bone, it goes in and it splits the bone lengthwise or laterally, depending on which point of angle it makes contact in the twist of the flight. And it splits and breaks the bone, then allowing the arrow a gap to fly through and continue to penetrate into the vitals.
Cut right on through.
So you're going to keep going. He also has what's called a tanto tip or a tanto, depending on whatever pronunciation. So that is a variation of a tip design. So where you don't have a broadhead that's sharpened out to a needle point, because that needle point will have a tendency when you hit heavy bone to just curl over or even break off if it's brittle, depending on your grade of steel. So with a tanto tip, it's more of a chisel, if you will. It's sharpened. It's still ultra razor sharp, but it's not as much of a needle point. It's sharpened back, almost a little bit more of a rounded look to it. And it's a lot more reinforced. Therefore, it's stronger. It's thicker steel there. And when that tip makes contact with heavy bone, it will not curl and bend over or, heaven forbid, just break off, right? So the idea there is so that you can make contact with heavy bone if you need to on a shot. If all you've got is a 1/4-2 shot on a 10-foot brown bear, you can take that shot through the shoulder if you have to. If you don't have any other option, you can put that broadhead through the shoulder, and you have confidence that if you hit that heavy shoulder bone or the shoulder blade on a bear, you will go through it. Now, a lot of times on a broadside shot, if you hit a shoulder blade, you're too high altogether anyway. But if you've got an extreme high angle down shot that you've got to shoot quartering to and high into the bear,
Mhm.
you might have to go through that shoulder blade. And in that instance, shooting a single bevel heavy arrow will go through that bone.
Right. Now, you've talked a lot about Ed Ashby.
Yeah.
And I like a lot of what he's done in a lot of his studies. Now,
Mhm.
there's another name,
Okay.
Iron Will Outfitters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And they're kind of it's interesting because at first you might hear their argument and think they're the opposite of
Mhm.
Ed Ashby and what he says about arrow flight and things like that. And what you begin to realize is they basically agree with almost everything that Ed Ashby teaches and talks about, except for they talk a lot more about tuning
Yes.
and actual physics, because I believe he was like a physics engineer.
Yeah.
Something like that.
He has
I
a
don't-
background in
yeah,
that somewhere.
And anyhow, so the owner of Iron Will Outfitters, and he's got a whole team there, and they make broadheads, and they look amazing. They're also like $125 for 3,
Mm.
versus I can walk into Sportsman's and grab a pack of G5 Montex for
100, well,
like $40.
Yeah, $60, I think, is the new M3s.
So I have the G5s that I have, which are the original G5 or whatever, but the carbon, I think I paid $40 or $50 a pack for.
Yeah.
And they're great broadheads, right?
Mhm.
And for what you need, they may do all you need. But like when we had Brad on,
Mhm.
he talked about tuning. And tuning is making sure that your arrow flies straight.
Right.
And high OFOC is good, and it's important, especially when it comes to penetration.
Yes.
But if your arrow's not flying straight, then if your arrow's flying straight, it's not as important, and that's where tuning comes in.
Mhm.
Now, I haven't personally done this, but I've watched and listened to a lot of stuff talking about it. But when you shoot your arrow through a piece of paper,
Mhm.
right, if it creates a single hole,
Yeah.
where you can see the broadhead cut, and that's what the arrow flies through, you're good.
Mhm.
It's tuned. But if you shoot your arrow through a piece of paper and it bends and tears the paper, it moves,
Yes.
then you're not tuned.
Right.
And that's where a lot of your stability over distance and a lot of those things come in.
Mhm.
Since we're getting into the nitty gritty, I thought I'd bring that up.
Yeah. No,
You
that's
looking
a
at
great point.
What you looking at right now?
I was trying to find what broadhead we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
I can't
yeah.
seem to find it. I know I've got a photo of it somewhere.
I do really like, I'm looking at Iron Will's website right now. They have wide series broadheads.
Yeah.
Single bevel with,
Mhm.
it's a 2-blade with bleeders, 2 1/8 inch
Wow.
cut.
That's a wide cut.
I really like that.
Yeah.
And the high FOC and weight come in a lot more when it comes to when you hit the animal, right?
Right.
Like you were talking about breaking the bone.
That momentum.
But
yeah.
We talk a lot about heavyweight bullet versus speed,
Right.
right?
Right.
And the same thing is important with a bow, but for a different reason.
Mhm.
With a bullet kills by blunt force trauma, and people like to talk about energy because of hydrostatic shock, right?
Yeah.
How much of that shock is transferred to the animal? How much does it disrupt the vital function?
Right.
That doesn't happen with a bow.
Right.
Does not happen with an arrow.
Yeah.
An arrow, your weight and your speed translate to how well that arrow cuts through the
Mhm.
animal.
Right.
Your speed and weight, in my opinion, are a lot more important. Weight is more important than speed in a bow
Mhm.
by far,
I totally agree with you.
because that weight is carrying more energy, and it has more energy to cut it
Mhm.
through the animal,
Yes.
especially if you dull your broadhead on impact either through a tough hide or a bone,
Right.
right?
And a lot of these guys, that they'll talk about expandable broadheads. It's not a cut-on contact broadhead.
No.
And it's not hard to find multiple videos out there in circulation,
Mhm.
whether it's on YouTube or if you go on Rockslide, or complaints about expandable broadheads that did not penetrate as advertised,
Yeah.
right? And these guys are shooting light, fast arrows.
Mhm.
Guys are all about speed in the compound world. Now, I grew up shooting a trad bow. I grew up shooting a recurve and a
Right.
longbow. And so to me, having a 650 grain or 700 grain arrow out of a 55-pound recurve bow was nothing. Like that was no
Yeah,
big deal. We had a subscription to Traditional Bow Hunter magazine when I was a kid. And I remember reading articles of guys that traveled to Australia to hunt water buffalo with
Mhm.
longbows. And there was one guy that killed a water buffalo with a 90-pound longbow and a 1,000 grain arrow.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about shooting a 2x4 through the air just about. That arrow
Right.
is heavy. Like it's noticeably heavier then a lot of these guys are trying to get in that 400 grain weight
Yeah.
range of a compound bow. The difference in the ability to penetrate is astronomically different between a 1,000 grain arrow and a 400 grain
Right.
arrow. But weight aside, I would still be comfortable shooting a brown bear with a bow with a 500 grain arrow or less within reason of your draw weight if I had a quality cut-on contact broadhead.
Mm-hmm.
I would shoot a brown bear with my current compound bow setup.
Mm-hmm.
My arrow is 600 and something grains. I don't know if it's 620 or 650.
I don't even remember
It's
what
something
mine
in
is right
there.
now, but
I'm shooting a full metal jacket Easton arrow
okay.
with 150 grain broadhead with a factory insert. It's not that heavy of a setup, and it's a full length shaft. So a lot of you guys out there will probably be able to tell me what my arrow weight is before I even know it,
Right.
just off of those specs right there. But that arrow is, I believe it's 600, give or take a little bit, but it's right up in that 600 grain range, which is heavy for a compound bow. And I'm shooting just under 70 pounds of draw weight.
Right.
That's where I'm set up at. That's what I'm tuned in at, and it shoots great. And I shoot, like I said, I've shot those G5 M3 broadheads, which is the old G5 Montec just without vents. So it's a solid steel broadhead.
I've got the ones with the vents.
Yeah, there's no vents in mine. Anyway, I would shoot a brown bear with that setup because of the broadhead.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cut-on contact. And when I sharpen mine, I don't sharpen them to a needle point. I actually round off the tips of mine when I'm sharpening.
So you've got a rounded, like the edge of a knife.
Right. So they're not quite a needle point. And I've shot clean through the bears that I've shot with those broadheads. Like through and through. The arrows do not stop.
Mm-hmm.
And I've hit rib in and out on one of them. And it shot 30 yards past the bear and stuck in a tree when I did that. Broke a rib in and a rib out. And it didn't even seem to slow it down hardly. You can just hear the dull, dry smack of those ribs being hit. So I would be comfortable shooting a brown bear with that setup, with that broadhead, because of the broadhead. The broadhead is what makes the arrow, in my opinion. If somebody doesn't want to change their arrow weight, if they say, look, I've got my speed, I've got my accuracy, I've got my tuning, and my arrow is 450 grains, and I want to shoot a coastal brown bear. Maybe you're an Alaska resident, you don't have to have a guide, and you say, I'm going to shoot a brown bear with my bow. That's totally fine. But don't shoot your rage expanding broadhead. Don't shoot your, and I don't even know how many other expandable broadheads there are out there.
What were the ones Brad was shooting, just so we can make him mad?
Man, I don't even know.
What they were.
I don't remember.
It was a common.
Yeah.
But I don't remember what they were.
I don't remember. But there's all kinds of different gimmicky expandable broadheads. It seems like every popular broadhead maker has expandable broadheads.
Right.
And those are probably fine for 90% of what you're going to do. But when you come to Alaska, it's a different ball game. And there are guys that do it with moose. You see guys like Jim Shockey have shot moose with expandables for quite a number of years. He doesn't seem to have any bad results that we know of. There's always the stories that guys shoot them and they don't recover a moose and they don't talk about it, right?
Right.
That happens. And that happens with good broadheads with poor shot placement, by the way. Shooting a good broadhead, or a good bullet for that matter, doesn't mean you're going to kill it if you shoot it in the kidneys, right? So I would be of the mindset that pick your broadhead first. As long as you've got enough draw weight, 60 pounds or more for a big brown bear, and then pick a really good cut-on contact broadhead. High grade steel. Make sure it is razor sharp. That's the number one most important thing with your broadhead. You get a good broadhead and then you learn how to sharpen it. You need to be able to hold up a piece of paper in front of yourself and just slice off chunks of that paper effortlessly. That's sharp. Not to where you've got to push hard on your arm to cut hair. That's not sharp enough. So I think that pretty much covers the whole broadhead and arrow weight thing. Heavier is better. If you're going to build a setup around that for brown bear hunting, heavier is better, and pick a high quality cut-on contact broadhead. Yeah. If you can, try to experiment with those single bevels, but the one thing I will say is wholly expensive. Those Ashby broadheads are not cheap.
How much are they?
The 3-pack was a couple $100. I think.
Well, in that case, I'd go with Iron Will.
Yeah, Iron Will has some good ones out there.
I really like these wide series. They have some that are single bevel.
Mhm.
Looks like
Do those have bleeders as well, or just the two
you
blades?
can get them with and without the bleeders. It looks like the bleeders are 3/4 of an inch because the main blade is 1.125 off the side of the broadhead.
Wow, that's a lot of cutting surface.
That I mean,
But I would wonder how much those bleeders would impede penetration if you hit a heavy bone, because after it breaks that bone going through it, those bleeders are going to catch.
I mean, and that's why they sell them with and without, right?
Yeah. That's going to be up to you. Obviously, you want a perfectly broadside shot into the ribs. You don't want to have to shoot through a shoulder, but might be your only option too. So take that into consideration.
In that wide single bevel, they sell up to a 200 grain.
Mm.
And you can get up to a 250 in the regular wide, but that's a double bevel.
Gotcha.
That's a heavy head.
Yeah. Yeah, it is heavy. Ashby sells up to a 300 grainer.
Well, I'm sure.
But, if you really wanted to beef up your forward of center weight, you can get a 200 grain broadhead and then a 100 grain or 150 grain or a 200 grain insert or outsert, depending on which company you go with.
Right.
I know Iron Will has several weight components that you can add to the front of an arrow to beef it up weight-wise. So, on to firearms.
Yeah.
This is going to be simple and something we've talked about before, but your firearm should be reconsidered between spring and fall brown bear hunting. The outfitter that I started working for several years ago told me an interesting thing when I first started for him. He said, I switch guns when I'm guiding fall hunts than when I'm guiding spring hunts. So in the spring, he has no problem guiding with a 375 H&H Magnum or even a 338 Win. However, in the fall, he said he won't go anything smaller than a 416 and he prefers a 458.
A lot of guys would go, I would imagine most guys would be more going from like a 300 to 338 to the 375. 416 is big.
Yeah.
458 is really big.
Yeah, that's elephant big. So I asked him, I said, well, what's the reason for that? And he said, well, because a bear might weigh 400 or 500 pounds more in the fall. And they can be a lot harder to kill in the fall than they are in the spring. In the springtime, they're all pretty lean. They've burned off most of their fat in hibernation.
Yeah.
And that bullet is going to easily get wherever it needs to go with a 338 or a 375. Now, I'm not saying that you have to switch up your guns, but it's just something to just keep in mind. And if you're buying a gun brand new for a brown bear hunt in the fall, I would look at it a little bit differently than you would look at it in the spring. In the spring, we'll just give an example. You're going to have a little bit higher chance of possibly a little bit longer shot because you're just finding them in those rut grounds. They're going to be on the beaches. You're going to be searching them out. They're going to be on the move. In the fall, there's a good chance that you'll find them on a river if you're hunting them over a salmon river. Your quarters are going to be a lot more tightly confined. Your shots are more likely to be inside 100 yards. And you're dealing with a bear that's 400 pounds plus heavier in the fall than he was in April or May. So should you bring more gun? Should you choose a tougher bullet?
Right.
So in the spring, even a 300 Win Mag might do the trick. And a well-placed bullet out of a 300 Win Mag will kill a brown bear even in the fall. But it's not going to do it the same as a 375 H&H or up will do. In the springtime, anything from a 300 to a 338 will be fine. I used my 338 Weatherby RPM this spring with no problem on a couple of bears. Zero problems with that gun. With that 205 grain bullet, which honestly is a bit light for most people's considerations for brown bears.
It's moving pretty fast.
It is moving fast, and that was what kind of gave me a little more peace of mind once I recovered that one out of a brown bear that I shot this spring to back up a client. And it sacked that bear. I mean, it put him down. The shot went underneath the spine and into the lungs, but it was kind of a high angle quartering shot as it was running away up a bank. And where it entered, the shock of those petals coming off and that rapid expansion in the first number of inches inside the bear's chest cavity, that shock disrupted the spine and killed the bear just immediately.
Let's
dead
talk
right there.
about that for a minute, because the a lot of guys talk about energy, and energy is it's becoming less and less popular, I think, to talk about in hunting, but it's still widely I'm going to shoot the animal with such and such, and I'm going to hit it with this much energy.
Yeah,
but you can shoot a moose with a 338 Lapua with a
285 grain bullet.
With a 285 FMJ, and it go right through that moose. And yeah, it may have had a certain amount of energy when it hit that moose, but it's going to be containing most of that energy and carrying it right through and not doing anything to the moose with it.
Right.
It'll poke a hole. Moose will die one day.
Yep.
But if where energy comes in is what it does when it hits the animal. You want that energy dumped in the vitals because it's hydrostatic shock, right? It disrupts the vitals. Like you said, it disrupted the spine.
And you only get that when the bullet expands. And the design of the hammers is fast, rapid, immediate expansion. Yeah.
Because the faster the expansion,
the more dramatic
energy
dump. Yeah.
The energy dump.
Yeah.
So the slower your bullet's going, even if it's a heavier bullet, it may not have the same amount of energy dump and dramatic displacement, right? Exactly. Yeah. That's going to disrupt, like you said, it disrupted the spine because it was so strong. There's a lot of bullets. Could have shot that bear within the same place. It wouldn't have had the same result.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So a good example is this last moose that my client and I were able to kill. When I had to shoot that moose, he was headed for the river.
Right.
My second shot, I tucked up a little bit farther forward, trying to hit that offside shoulder.
Yeah.
My first shot was in the back of the lungs, just through the ribs. My second shot, I gave him a little more lead because he was really moving. And I hit him up behind that front shoulder on my side, and then it went up through the far side shoulder, and I found it underneath the hide. It had poked a little hole, and I found the bullet sticking out of the offside shoulder hide at the front of the shoulder. So it went through, took out the confluence of the lungs at the front of the animal, and went through that and disrupted all that vital function there. That massive controlled expansion and that huge energy dump that you get with those hammers from shedding those petals and then that shank continuing on through, that permanent wound cavity, okay. When you see a bullet go through ballistics gel,
exactly what I was thinking.
You see that massive
cavitation,
expansion, that big air bubble, and then it collapses and there's smoke that comes out the entrance hole and the bullet keeps on going deeper into the gel. But as the bullet continues on, there's no big permanent wound cavity farther into the gel, like past 15 inches. But that first 15 inches is where you get all of your expansion. That's where all of that energy dump occurs. And that's what the hammer bullets do. When I shot that moose, it knocked the wind out of him. I could hear him as he collapsed and hit the ground.
Yeah.
All the air went out of him there. He got smashed with that bullet. And the same thing happened with that brown bear. When I shot him, all that energy dump just immediately. And what I've heard Steve from Hammer describe that as, and I don't know if this is exactly what's happening, but it could be. And it's a valid theory, is that when you get that much hydraulic pressure of the fluids, it gives the animal a stroke because it spikes their blood pressure.
Yeah.
And it pressurizes that chest cavity. And it strokes them out, is what Steve said.
No, there's ancient.
It's a very interesting idea.
It's not that ancient, but there's one of the Soviet methods of torture that ended in death was they'd suspend a victim's arms and legs and slowly work them with, say, like ace bandage type material.
Yeah. Yep.
On the hands, from the wrists up to the shoulders, and the legs from the ankle all the way up to the thigh.
Yep.
And all the way up to the waist. And what that did is they'd slowly push all the blood out and get that victim to a point where they couldn't feel their arms and legs anymore. And they leave them that way long enough, they'll die.
Yeah.
Because, or they'll lose their limbs. They'll survive, but they'll lose their limbs.
Right.
And, you convince them of that, and then they tell you what you need to tell them. And if you want them to live, you slowly remove the, one arm at a time. You slowly work them back into circulation.
Yeah.
But if you rapidly just rip all that ace bandage off, it'll kill them.
Yeah.
because all of a sudden, all that blood, everything's being returned. So it could be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's that sudden spike of blood pressure where it's not supposed to be.
Right.
That's a very interesting comparison.
Yeah. I thought so. You can thank Jack Carr for that one. I learned about that from his books.
Well, so anyway, the idea there is that controlled expansion from a bullet and a cartridge that will get the bullet into the vitals is what you want. You don't want a bullet that'll just shoot straight through something, right? So you have to have expansion.
Right.
You don't want too much expansion and the bullet just come apart, like with a match bullet, say, like with a Berger design. Like a Berger VLD hunting bullet is designed to expand extremely fast and then tumble, right? What's left of it just tumbles through the animal.
Yeah.
And the nose and the entirety of that cup and core bullet is just designed to just come apart. It's almost designed to implode instead of expand outward. So that nose is going to crush inward, and then what's left of the bullet will just come apart inside the animal. And it's killed by fragmentation, which is unreliable at best.
It is.
Because sometimes those bullets don't expand, and you'll get guys that'll just shoot straight through something.
Right. And the thing with that fragmentation is it dumps the energy, but it dissipates off so quickly and in all those little pieces that it doesn't create that cavitation.
Yeah.
It doesn't create that massive expansion and then suction effect.
Exactly. So that's why I've been okay with shooting that 338 with a 205, because the blend of velocity and the bullet design, I'm confident enough right now. I haven't had an animal yet, and I've shot, over 1,000-pound moose with it. I'm sure it was over 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, every bit of it, yeah.
And I've shot brown bears and I've shot black bears with it, and the effect is always the same. It just zaps them. It just puts them out almost immediately. As long as the bullet is put in the vitals, it does the same thing.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to go up in cartridge, and that's what I was kind of getting back to here. That old outfitter that I was working for at the time there, his solution to a bigger, heavier bear was to change cartridges. He was going to go from either a 250 grain in a 338, like a 250 grain partition, or a 375 H&H with a 300 grain Barnes or Swift A-frame, to then go up in bullet weight to like a 416 Remington with a 400 grain A-frame, or a 458 Win Mag with a 500 grain bullet. His solution was, it's thicker, it's heavier, so I've got to penetrate deeper into it with a bigger bullet.
On traditional bullets.
Right. With traditional bullets, that would be the way I would think of it as well. Not necessarily saying that I wouldn't shoot a fall bear with a 338 or a 375. With the right bullet, it will work just fine.
Right.
I don't personally subscribe to that theory, but there are a lot of guys that do, and that's personal preference. A good 375 Magnum is really all you need to kill a brown bear. I don't think you need more than that. I don't think that you need a 416 to stop a brown bear. It's a better stopping gun, for a charge only situation. Of course, more is better. Why not a 470 nitro double at that point?
Right. Hey, Buffalo Boar and Hammer. Buffalo Boar is supposed to be loading 600 nitro with that shock hammer.
Really?
Hammer designed a shock hammer for Buffalo Boar. It's a 600 grain for 600 nitro.
Wow.
And they're not, I was looking at their website. It doesn't look like it's available yet, but Hammer announced that.
Wow.
So you can purchase that on the website if you've got a 600 nitro and you need some bullets for it.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive.
You talk about some expansion.
Yeah, that's some stopping power right there.
You've got the big weight and you've got the massive cavitation.
Yeah, that's impressive. I'm interested to see how that works on some elephants or something like that.
Yeah.
Man, I wish I could test that on some African critters.
I'll just see what happens when you shoot a brown bear with it.
Yeah. Got to buy the rifle first. That's like $20,000.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, so back to reality. 375 H&H has kind of been the gold standard for Alaskan guide guns for brown bear hunting for a long time. 338 is also very, very popular. And that's because the recoil on a 375 H&H is pretty manageable for a dangerous game cartridge. It's at the lower end of what an African PH would be able to carry. It actually doesn't meet a lot of the minimum standards that African professional hunters, guides basically, need to have in a guide rifle.
for a lot of those guys, they have to start with like a 458 Win Mag or 458 lot. So the 375 H&H doesn't even qualify because it's not a big enough bullet and it's not going fast enough with enough energy.
Right.
So they've got to go even larger. But for us, brown bears, while they are a dangerous game animal, they don't require as much cartridge and bullet weight to get good penetration in. So for the sake of what we're talking about here today, we're going to talk about 375s or less.
Okay.
And if you're going to Alaska or coming here to Alaska, or if you're an Alaska resident and you want to start hunting brown bears, what do you reasonably need to ethically and safely kill a brown bear with a hunting rifle? And that's different than a guide rifle.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a stopping rifle necessarily. And I need to keep that in mind. But for a hunting rifle, we're talking about you are in control of where the first shot goes. You can dictate, all right, he's quartering to me. I've got a 30-06. I'm not going to take that shot because if I hit the shoulder, I might not go all the way back into the lungs like I want to, right? Because I don't have enough momentum. I'm shooting a slower bullet with a lot less mass. So my momentum is a lot lower. With a 375 H&H, you can pretty much pick your shot angle, and you, as long as you're shooting the right bullet, like a 270 grain shock hammer,
right?
That's going to get you anywhere you need to go. That'll be just fine. So let's start at the low end. What do you think would be the minimum if you were going to go brown bear hunting for yourself, and you had a friend with a backup gun, say 375? Say it was me.
Okay.
And you were going to shoot a brown bear. What would be the least potent cartridge and bullet weight combo that you would want to shoot, and why? This is highly personal.
This is highly personal.
But we're going to step on a lot of toes, so I'm looking forward to it.
That's a hard question. So I would probably go for a slower but bigger, like a 45-70, if I was going minimum.
Okay. So you're thinking minimum for velocity.
That's velocity.
Okay.
Be like a 45-70. I've got some 275 loads that are moving about
hammers
that are moving about 20. I can't remember what I was getting, 22 or 2400 feet per second.
Wow, that's pretty quick.
And I mean, it's a moving bullet, especially out of a 45.
I thought it was like 22 or 2250.
It might be that. That might be that.
Yeah.
I think they say you can get up to 24, but I didn't work that hard to get up there. I got to 22 and I was happy.
And you've got an 18-inch barrel.
And I've got an 18-inch barrel, so that's good.
Yeah.
Right? That's real
good. Yeah, plenty good. Well above factory specs.
And it doesn't even kick hard. That, or I don't think, caliber-wise, I'd want to go less than a 30. Probably like a 30-06. I don't think I'd want to go any slower than like a 06.
Yeah.
That's probably what I would say is
what
smallest.
Bullet weight would you steer to in a 06?
Brown bear? Probably 180.
Yeah.
I think a 180 is what I'd want to stick with.
Yeah, that's probably where I would land as well.
Because you're still going to get a decent amount of velocity.
2,700.
Yeah, but you still got enough weight to carry that heavier bullet, like we talked about, because it does matter the weight of your bullet, especially when you're hitting a tough white animal.
And what about the least amount of integrity in bullet construction? Would you shoot a 178 ELDX?
I don't think I would. No.
Yeah, neither would I.
I know James wouldn't.
Yeah, James for sure wouldn't. I'm sure he's screaming at the radio right now. No ELDX.
I honestly, I've hunted with monolithic bullets for a long time.
Yeah.
Hammers now, and it was Barnes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even hardly have any experience with bonded bullets. So I would probably say hammer being ideal. I wouldn't want to do anything, a Barnes. Understanding bonded bullet construction, I'd probably be okay with, a Sirocco.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, like 180 grain.
Yeah, exactly. 180 grain in any of it.
Yeah.
But ideally, it'd be a 180 grain shock hammer.
Yeah. Right. So the one thing that you've got to consider when you go down in velocity in a cartridge, right? So a 30-06 is going to be a common one. And I've seen a number of guys that have killed brown bears with 7 mags and 30-06s and 270s even, 270 Winchester. The common denominator seems to be that guys go a little bit lighter in bullet weight, but a lot tougher in bullet construction.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these guys, I've seen a number of brown bears on some of these forums that guys have reported shooting with a 130 grain bullet out of a 270, but it's a Barnes, right?
Okay.
So it's going 3,000 feet a second.
Yeah.
And it's a monometal. So it's going to get where it needs to go. If you shoot a 270 with a 130 grain Barnes into ballistics gel, you're going to get excellent penetration. Not because of the bullet weight, but because of the bullet construction. And it retains weight.
Right.
If you were to shoot a brown bear with a 130 grain, let's just say Nosler ballistic tip, then you're going to shed a good 50% plus of that 130 grains. And what's left to continue penetrating into that animal is not going to be enough to carry through that heavy medium in the chest cavity, right? So having a higher weight retention bullet, and again, this is all with a hunting rifle in mind. So you're making sure that that first shot is a perfectly broadside, ideal angle into the ribs shot. The lower you go in cartridge size and caliber and bore diameter, the more concerned you have to be about your first shot.
I think the ideal bullet I would do in that 30-06, they have a 178 absolute hammer, which would
could really hop it
would
up.
Be smoking hot. I mean, it'd be 29 to 3,000 probably feet per second.
So the absolute hammer, Nosler. Hammer has a disclaimer on their website with the absolute hammer bullets. Those you have to load a lot less than you think you do.
You start out low and work your way up. Yeah.
You never
buy
start,
more bullets for testing.
Yeah. You never start at your middle ground of velocity of traditional load data with an absolute hammer. You always start at the low end, and you're going to be faster than you think. Yeah. They don't fly the same as other hammer bullets do. So you got to be very careful loading those. But that bullet would give you the opportunity to take a 180 grain weight range bullet in an 06 that would typically be 27 to 2750 muzzle velocity, and jump that up to closer to like a 300 Win Mag velocity.
Yes. That's the claim to fame on the absolutes, is they kind of up your...
Right.
It's like upping your case capacity.
Right, exactly, without changing your cartridge.
Right. But more typical, if I'm doing a factory load, if I find a factory hammer, the Hender shots, there's a bunch of companies, I'm sure, that would load a 30-06 with hammers now. Yeah. You can go to Hammers Facebook, they just updated those companies. I would be looking for 180 grain range, brown bear specific. I'd be looking for a shock hammer of some sort. Yeah,
something that's going to expand quickly and retain a lot of weight.
That'd be my personal minimum.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. So a 300 Win Mag will do the job well. It won't do it great as a stopping round, but again, we're talking about a hunting cartridge. 300 Win Mag is, in my opinion, where you get into, okay, that's fine. I don't even have a question about that, because even if you're shooting a bonded lead core bullet like 180 grain Nosler AccuBond, you're still going to get adequate penetration through the ribs of a brown bear with 180 grain AccuBond. Even something like a 200 grain Hornady ELDX, as long as you put it in the ribs and you don't shoot it in the shoulder, that bullet will kill the bear.
Right.
Because at this point, you're in the cartridge realm where you've got enough velocity combined with a heavy enough bullet that you're going to get where you need to go with a properly placed first broadside shot.
Right.
I still wouldn't, on a 300 Win Mag with a lead core bullet, take a frontal shot on a brown bear, not on a 9-foot plus bear. I've seen those bears soak up some lead, and I've seen how deeply penetrating some of these bullets go, and you'd be surprised how little penetration you can get, even out of like a 338 Win Mag. With I had one client one time that had a 225 grain Remington core locked out of a 338 Win Mag.
Right.
And he shot a brown bear square on, straight in the chest, underneath the chin. And that bullet did not make it all the way through the lungs. It hit the bear in the chest, expanded completely inside that bear's chest, and sent the bear into a front roll, into a somersault. And then we ended up shooting that bear multiple other times to put him down. And when I took that bear apart and I opened up the chest cavity to look at what was going on inside there, I found the core lock laying in the bottom of the chest cavity. And you could see quite easily where it had gone up halfway through the lungs, and it was sitting in one of the lung bags in the bottom of the chest cavity. It did not even go all the way through the lungs. So That's a good example of you have plenty of cartridge capability, but the wrong bullet choice. It expanded too quickly, lost too much weight, therefore it killed its own momentum, and it stopped penetrating.
So that's one thing I like about the hammers is their penetration.
Yeah.
I know this episode sounds like it's an ad for Hammer.
Yeah, well, it's just where we ended up.
Yeah, it is. But, with a bonded bullet, you end up with a big old frontal face that loses velocity rapidly.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and especially, like I said, in a broadside shot. But with a hammer, it sheds the petals, and the bullet continues through.
That shank.
The shank continues through with a cutting face.
Yeah, a flat front.
A flat, squared up front that's cutting its way through.
Right.
And that actually creates a suction in that cavitation it just created.
Yes.
So it's more more vital disruption.
Yes.
And it's continuing to penetrate through whatever it needs to penetrate, right?
Right, exactly. So a 300 Win Mag, you start to get up into the better choices. 338 Win Mag is probably one of the all-time favorite all-around Alaska cartridges. 338 Win Mag, it's been around for forever. You can pretty much find ammo anywhere in any small town that you go to in Alaska, at least pre-COVID you could. But 300 Win Mag, 338 Win Mag, and 375 H&H Magnum are going to be your probably the lion's share of cartridges that you'll find in that Magnum realm, right? So the 338 Win Mag, probably the most popular bullet weight nowadays is probably a 225 because it's a better blend of velocity and weight. You can get down to like a 180 grain bullet. I know Hornady loads a few 180s, and Weatherby loads 185 grain Barnes TTSX in their 338 Weatherby RPM in their factory ammo. That
thing's got to be smoking.
Yeah, it's going along pretty quick. Depends on how long your barrel is.
Yeah.
But that you have a tremendous amount of variability between a 180 grain bullet all the way up to like a 250. And the 250 typically has belonged to the Remington core lock and a Nosler partition. Those are probably the two most popular bullet styles in that 250 weight range that I've seen around. Nowadays, you've got the Hornady ELDX comes in a 230 grain bullet, I believe. That wouldn't be a bad option either. But just keep in mind that with different bullet constructions, you're going to get different abilities to penetrate. With an ELDX, you're probably not going to get from stem to stern in a running away shot, right? So on a backup shot, if you shoot that bear one time and he runs off or tries to, and you try to put one up his tailpipe, that ELDX is going to obliterate the back hip and it'll slow that bear down plenty, but it's not going to get all the way up into the chest cavity.
Right.
The next step up, I would say, is the 375s. I mean, that there are the 35 Whalens and things like that, but for the commonality's sake, the 375 H&H and the 375 Ruger probably occupy, I would say 70%. I would be willing to guess of the guiding industry in Alaska between the 375 H&H and the 375 Ruger. That's probably the vast majority of your guide guns in circulation right now. And that's for one reason. You have versatility in a dangerous game cartridge. You can shoot down to a hand-loaded 225 grain or all the way up to a 350 grain hand-loaded round as well, with most of your factory ammo falling either on a 250 grain, a 270, or a 300 grain being the most popular.
Are they fairly ballistically similar?
The Ruger and the H&H?
Yeah.
The Ruger has 6% more case capacity than the H&H does.
That doesn't necessarily translate to velocity.
For factory loads, you'll usually see a little bit of an uptick in velocity compared to the H&H in contemporary bullet weights, but not a significant amount. If you get ammunition from Buffalo Bore, I used to guide with a 375 Ruger with a 270 grain Barnes TSX. Out of a 20-inch barrel, I was getting 2750. That same round out of a 375 H&H was getting about 2650 or 2675.
So, at the distances you're going to be using that, it really isn't.
Yeah, about 100 feet a second, not enough to make a difference. At the end of the day, it really comes down to what rifle you can find. And the Rugers, the 375 Rugers are a lot easier to find nowadays than a 375 H&H is. The only current production 375 H&Hs from Winchester are both woodstock and blued barrels. They don't even offer an Alaska grade
really?
rifle that would stand up to the elements. So if you buy a factory 375 H&H, chances are you've got to have the stock replaced and get it Cerakoted before you bring it up here. Or else you're practically going to ruin it in the salt water unless you oil it every day, which can work.
It looks like hand loads. You can get the 375 Ruger up a couple 100 feet a second faster.
Yeah, I'm sure with hand loads you could.
It's based on Nosler data.
Yeah. So the most common bullet weight for either one of those is going to be a 300 grain bullet. I've had really good luck with 270 grain Barnes over the years out of my Ruger.
Mm-hmm. And
going back to the backup shot deal, I've shot brown bears several different times and several different sizes of bears, ranging up to a 10'3" and all the way down to a 9-footer with that Ruger cartridge with, again, that 270 grain Barnes TSX. And I've shot end to end, through and through, butt to chest, all the way through and out of brown bears with that 270 grain bullet, because you get a little bit more blend of velocity as to just heavy weight, right? So if I was going to advise somebody, and this is where we'll just kind of wrap back to with this discussion, if you had to pick a hunting rifle to hunt in Alaska for a brown bear, and you can stand the recoil, I would recommend a 375 H&H. That's just my personal preference. I am very biased to that cartridge. If you can handle the recoil of a 375 Ruger or something bigger, that might be for you. But most people can't handle even a 338 Win Mag's recoil compared to a 300. The 375 is more of a push than a sharp recoiling punch. And a lot of folks can shoot a 375 H&H a lot easier than a 338 Win Mag. There's just something different about that case and how it recoils compared to a 338 Win Mag. So for that reason, my ideal brown bear hunting rifle, and this is what I've shot my personal brown bear with, was a 375 H&H. It's easy to shoot, ammunition is widely available, and you have no doubt that no matter what the shot angle is, as long as you're shooting the proper bullet, that the bullet will get into the vitals no matter what.
I'm looking at some of the load data for 375 Ruger, 375 H&H, comparing it to available hammer bullets, because that's what I do now when I'm thinking about cartridges.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. And I like what I see. It looks like with a 270 grain shock hammer.
Yeah, that's what I want to reload for my 375s.
You could get that with the 375 Ruger. You could get that up to 2,800 feet per second.
Yeah,
and that would be they actually Barnes makes a 270 LRX.
Yeah, that's harder to find.
Probably especially factory loads.
I've never seen it in a factory load. I don't even think they load it in a factory.
It's in their load data book. That's where I see it on here.
Okay.
But, anyhow, it looks like a sweet.
What about the velocity for the 270 grain shock hammer out of an H&H? 2,700.
Let me pull some of that up here.
I'm just curious.
I looked at the.
We'll wrap back to that in a second.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Let's touch on one more thing. Rifle scopes. Bring something low power with an illuminated center dot if you can. If you have an illuminated reticle, whether it's a Trijicon scope with a what's that that little, man, I'm spacing that out now. That little glow section like you have on iron sights. Fiber optic.
Oh yeah, there you go.
It has a little fiber optic coil on top of the rear of the scope that provides light to a center dot in your crosshairs. That way you don't have to have battery power. That works great so that you've got something to just pull up and that dot is where you want to shoot, right? Or Leupold makes the fire dot. I already mentioned that on that VX6 that I've got on my 338, it's got that little red dot in the center. That works awesome for low light shooting scenarios. And for brown bear hunting, a lot of your shooting is going to be last light of the day. And you need to be able to see your reticle well against a very dark brown bear hide at last light. So something in that 1 to 5 or 1.5 to 5. Leupold has a variety of options in that. And then Trijicon also is kind of my second recommendation, if you will, for that fiber optic option in your reticle as well.
All right. Yeah, and you had a What was that scope you had for a little while there? I don't know if you hunted with it. You had that SIG?
I had a SIG. Yeah, I did. I used that this spring on on my bait.
That thing looked sweet.
That was a 1-8. Yep. That was a pretty affordable scope too. A friend of mine now has that on one of his 375s.
Okay.
That's a battery powered illuminated center dot.
Big tube on it too. So
yeah, 30 mil. Yep.
Yeah, lots of light retention there.
Yep.
All right. So in the 375 H&H from the Barnes load data, that's what I like to compare to for initial, just looking at getting a rough idea of what a hammer is going to do. I have found that the hammer HHTs tend to fly slower. Just overall, they're a slower moving bullet.
A little more bearing surface, maybe.
Probably. The regular hammer hunters seem to be pretty slick.
Yeah.
They're going to perform more like a Barnes.
Yeah.
Probably. Anyhow, so the 375 H&H 270 TSX, so they're looking at around 26, the high 2600 to 27. If you can find some ramshot big game, maybe even 28.
Whoa. Out of a 22 or 24 inch barrel?
These are out of a...
Probably 24.
Probably. Let's see here. 24, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So my Model 70 has a 24 inch barrel on it, so that would be...
Yeah.
But so probably expect something in that upper 2600.
Yeah. I mean,
to be safe.
Now most of these loads, most of them are, there's only one in 26. The rest are in 27.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
so,
most of these loads.
So low 2,700 feet per second.
Yeah. Most of these loads are compressed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which is okay. They're probably compressed because it's a monolithic, which means they've got to push it a little further into the case than you would with a jacketed. But, and if you can find your lands and push your bullet length out there a little longer, if your magazine can fit that. It's what I did with my 300 short mag, and that thing shoots lights out.
Yeah.
But
for sure. Well, man, we went into some good detail there.
We went deep.
Yeah, we got into quite a bit of cartridges, kind of covered the main ones, .6, 300 Win Mag, 338, and 375s. But that's kind of the lion's share of the common choices for brown bear hunting rounds up here anyway. If you've got something different, it somewhere in that category between 300 and 375 that you shoot well and that you've got a good controlled expansion bullet, you'll be just fine.
Right.
It's not something to obsess over. And if you've got a good gun that you shoot well with good bullets, don't change what already works. My client that just came up and did this moose hunt asked me, he said, well, what gun would you recommend if I wanted to come back and do a brown bear hunt? And I said, the exact gun that you've got in your hands right now. He's had that same Model 700 for 30 years.
Nice.
And he shoots it well, aside from the hang fire problem.
Right.
He shoots that gun extremely well. He's familiar with it.
Was that the gun or was that the ammunition?
So it was choice ammunition and it was brand new ammo. And he's shot a ton of it at home. He's gone through like 4 boxes at home and never had a problem. I'm leaning towards he probably had some grease in the firing pin spring, or the spring was just...
It was cold.
It was just weak. Yeah, and it was much colder up here on our hunt.
That could definitely
than
affect
it was
That could
back
also
at his
affect,
home.
That could also affect how that ammunition shoots.
It could.
It
could.
Some of the stuff that can cause that ammunition could be primer. It could be the fact that if it was a little bit of a loose load, it wasn't full case capacity.
Yeah.
Especially in more of a ball powder.
Yeah.
It could have just been that the ignition took a little longer to really take on that powder.
I mean, it was taking
depending on the temperature,
a second to go off. At some point.
I'm sure he didn't know all the load data and powder and everything that was.
No,
used.
he said that the guy at Choice sent him the details. So I'm going to get that at some point, and you and I can go over that. I'm very curious on what the info was.
Shake one of those shells next to your ear, did you?
I didn't. I thought about it after I left, and I thought, man, I wish I would have done that, because I had the same thought. I thought, man, what if they used a real slow burning powder or a real temp sensitive powder, and it wasn't a full case? That could have been an ignition issue. I'm leaning more towards a weak primer strike. But, then again, all the primer strikes looked normal on the cases that hang fired.
Huh.
So I don't know. It's kind of a puzzler. For any of you listeners out there, if you ever had a hang fire, write us into the show and let us know what your experience has been and what you ended up figuring out the cause of that was. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out what that was. and we can go from there and
That's
bring
right,
back
yeah.
more details and learn something about that. But
Well, it's been about an hour and a half.
yeah, I think we've pretty much covered brown bear hunting and beat this to death for now. And hopefully when I get back from this hunt, we've got a fun story to go over and a dead brown bear to share photos of, and we can go from there. But if you guys like the show and like what we're doing, be sure to go to our website, thenorthernhunter.com, and support us by shopping from our merchandise and any of our partners on there with
That's
our
right.
corresponding discount codes. And also, whatever platform you're listening on, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or whatever you choose to listen on, be sure to leave us a written review, a positive review. We'd really appreciate that. And also give us a 5-star rating. And if you've got a question or a comment about content that we have discussed or something that you'd like to hear about from us in the future for another episode, be sure to email us at thenorthernhunter.com. And we have a contact us button there. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and end this one, and we'll see you guys next Monday. Until then, get out there, get after it. Good luck.
All right, folks. We all know that one of the most common mishaps in hunting is damage to your rifle scope. Last year, I found the solution to that problem with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. It wraps around your scope and actions securely to protect it from getting knocked off of zero or even severely damaged. Stealthy Hunter also has a glassing pad and a wide variety of supplements for the outdoorsman, such as protein powder, CBD products, turmeric, and gut health supplements. They also make a lightweight trauma kit weighing in at just 14 ounces that includes everything you need and nothing you don't for all of your backcountry medical emergencies. To shop all of their equipment and supplements, go to STEALTHYHunter.com and enter the discount code at checkout, The Northern Hunter, to save on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.